Good morning. Welcome to the TC Dojo, where you decide what to learn. You choose the topics and we find the experts. Today it's our great pleasure to have in the TC Dojo Neil Perlin. It's always a great treat to get Neil in the TC Dojo. He is an internationally known consultant specializing in helping companies use their information efficiently, effectively, and correctly in all kinds of outputs using a wide range of tools. It's been my pleasure to have known Neil for several years, and each and every time I watch his presentations, I learn something new. All right, Neil, are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's switch
All right.
control to you.
All right.
Show your screen.
Second. All right. Do you see my screen?
Yep, it's all yours.
All right. Very good. All right. I want to thank Liz for inviting me and for always making this fun. And you guys, you folks who were here last month for part one, that was the overview of really what responsive design is. What I'm going to do now is pick up on the technical issues, specific technical issues, and design issues. I'm going to go through this quickly because there's a lot to cover here. If you have any questions, as Liz said, write them in the chat pod. If I don't get to them in time, you'll have my contact information on the last slide. Feel free to email me. So first thing I want to do is talk about technical issues, and this was where I ended last month with local formatting. Again, I have an example. This is local formatting. This is right here. The P is just the way things should be. Don't do local formatting. It's bad. It's inefficient. And I will note, as I say here, this has nothing to do per se with responsive design. Although it does bulk up the files, it may just slow down downloading, but it's just bad coding practice in general. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more is an increasing emphasis on good coding practice. Follow good syntax, don't take shortcuts, etc. And one of the worst shortcuts and bad habits is local formatting. So if you have legacy projects that contain a lot of local formatting, you're going to want to clean that out. This is not the most exciting thing in the world, or maybe it is, depending on your perspective, but it is a good thing to do. Just get rid of the local formatting and replace it with styles, which may take you into your CSS. You may have to clean up your CSS. In fact, I'm doing a project like that right now, almost as we speak, cleaning up legacy stuff, legacy junk in the CSS. And you want to think about switching from points to a relative size unit like I discussed last month. All right, image issues. Images are often sized in inches or pixels, and they're positioned via hidden tables, which means we have two problems. They can't resize as the screen size changes, and also as the screen size changes, if you have several images that are next to each other horizontally, they cannot wrap, which means you're going to get horizontal scrolling. Horizontal scrolling is not necessarily the tool of the devil, as it's sometimes portrayed, but if you have horizontal scrolling as well as vertical scrolling, it tends to hurt usability simply because it's like trying to read a billboard through a paper towel roller. You're constantly moving left, right, up, down, etc. So the less horizontal scrolling you have, the better off you are. And again, what you want to do is try to change to a relative size unit, like percent. You want to remove images from tables. Stop using tables with hidden borders, and instead position your images using the float property of the image IMG tag in the style sheet. And what this suggests is that you may wind up having to get a little bit more familiar with aspects of the CSS standard than you have been up to now. But the more you do, the more flexible you are. All right, also, and again, as I said, I was going to move pretty quickly. If anybody has any questions, I've got the chat pod open. And again, one of the problems is that we often insert images and style them one at a time. Right-click on the image, select image properties, do something, and then you do it again for the next image. And the problem with that, of course, is that it's local formatting. which means that there's no way to make a global change to the image properties or to the properties of a group of images. So what you want to do is insert images and style them using styles. You can set the properties that you want for the IMG tag, or if you want to be able to treat images in subgroups, what you can do is create subclasses under the IMG tag and apply them to the images. It's like creating different subcategories of images and defining properties for those subcategories. One side note, for those of you who are Flare users, one of the options for controlling image size is the percent option, and you'll see that the percent option is only available for the image style on the style sheet. It is not available if you're doing local formatting for the images. I mention that because I have had people tell me they can't find the percent option, and that's because it's not available locally. All right, tables, again, if you have fixed table sizes, they won't resize. Just like images, you're going to get the horizontal scroll bar. So again, a good idea is to define your table widths relatively. Define them in percent of the window or based on the content. Don't say tables will be 6 inches wide because they can't resize. So again, use any auto size option. Nice trick, RoboHelp 11 and up can auto-convert images and tables to relative sizes. If you're using RoboHelp and you indicate that you want to create responsive output and you have a lot of legacy images and tables whose sizes were hard-coded, there is an option in RoboHelp to change that hard-code sizing to relative. That's useful. And there'll probably be more legacy issues. And then we get into nuance, because there are some things that we just haven't had to worry about up until now, but once we get to responsive design, all of a sudden, we better start paying attention to these things. Now, potentially, we have to worry about displaying images on different resolutions up to retina displays, and the retina display is just Apple's cool marketing term for a device which has a higher resolution, a higher pixel density than normal devices. And the reason this is important is that if you're doing responsive design, you're not only worrying about having to output the material to a handheld device, but to handheld devices with different resolutions. So if you're dealing with images, how does the browser know which image to use for a given resolution, which suggests, by the way, that you're going to be concerned about defining multiple versions of the images for different resolutions, which means your workload is going to go up. But one of the things you'll want to look at is a command called source set, src set, which simply tells the browser, or you use it to tell the browsers what images you've included in the output, and then let the browser figure out which one to use. And there's a URL here where you can go for information. All right, movie issues. If you're creating movies in tools like Captivate, Camtasia, Articulate, Madcap, Mimic, etc., you have to remember that any legacy movies were probably created in Swift, Shockwave Flash format. The problem is Swift will not run on iOS devices, Apple devices, which means you're going to have to convert them to HTML5. And you're also, from now on, going to have to start creating new movies in HTML5 format. When you create your movies, you want to create them using a tool that supports responsive design, or they won't scale. In other words, the screen will scale, but the movie itself won't. So you'll wind up with a screen that scales nicely, except for that movie, which all of a sudden throws in a horizontal scroll bar. So you'll want to check carefully if you're using any of these authoring tools to make sure the one you're using supports responsive output. I'm of mixed, sort of two minds about including this slide. Adobe is of the opinion that responsive design has a substantial effect on download times. And I don't know if you can read the notes at the bottom of each one of the bars, but for according to the URL, and I included the URL here, an average load speed on a smartphone is about 5 seconds. Go to responsive design, it almost doubles. Go to a dedicated mobile site, it drops down by 40% to about 3 seconds. If you're only using a desktop site, it's almost 7 seconds. And we're talking a couple of seconds here, 3-4 seconds, who cares? But again, the slower the download, the more likely it is that the user is going to say, oh, the heck with this, and go on to a different site. So I don't know the answer to this. I've talked to various vendors about this. Adobe feels it is a potential issue. Madcap and some others do not, as networks have gotten faster. So this is something you may just want to look at. All right, finally, CSS optimization, which is a fairly new thing. But what it means is simply, in a nice circular definition, optimizing the CSS. In other words, there's shorthand within the CSS standard that lets you reduce the footprint of a property definition. For example, if you want to set the margins for the P tag, you can set them individually, as you see here, or you can replace that with the line at the bottom, P margin 10, 20, 10, 20, and the system knows to start counting from top, right, bottom, left. And there's even shorthand if you just want to specify the top and bottom and the left and right. There's a shorthand for that. The point is to try to make your style sheets, your CSSs, as efficient and short, as brief as possible. And there's a lot of information out there. My suggestion is just Google CSS optimization. I'm thinking of actually writing a short article about this at some point early in 16, but it's an interesting thing to read. Now, what I want to do is turn to design and writing issues, because this is going to be different. It's more difficult in some ways. We create a lot of content because we always have, because the tools let us. There was nothing stopping us. One of my saving graces was that the first hypertext authoring tool that I started using in 1987 had a limit, a character limit per file of 3,000 characters, which sounds like a lot, but we're talking maybe 300 words plus spaces. You can't write very much, so you really have to cut like mad. And we can cut a lot. I've been a columnist for various publications, including STC Intercom for years, and I know when I first write a column, draft one, for some reason, is invariably 2,500 words. And my first editing pass, I go through, clean up, hack out all the ums and so on, and invariably it drops down to about 1,600 words. Second pass, a lot more cleanup, and it works out to about 1,100 to 1,200 words. It's almost uncanny, but that happens almost every time. But I find that doing a third pass to go below 1,200 words is really tough. But the problem is that at some point the style will change, and you can't really edit for that. In some cases, it may be easier just to throw out an existing document and redo it in a new style. And I'll give you an example, and this may be kind of a silly example, but I like it. I was an English major, very, very odd college career, but one of my favorite poets, English poet named Alfred Noyes, who wrote a poem called The Highwayman. And it starts off like this: the wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees, which I always liked, and rewritten for mobile device, it was windy. Works fine. I have cut the word count by about 80%, but it loses something stylistically. I think you'll agree. So what you want to think about as far as writing is concerned is an idea called mobile first that was first promulgated by a guy named Luke Robleski, and I actually have the link to his article down at the bottom. But basically what he's saying is don't write for the desktop and then cut to try to fit it into a mobile device, but instead write for the mobile device first. For a couple of reasons. The big reason, perhaps, is that the mobile market is exploding. There's a lot of work there, but it also forces you to focus. And if you focus by writing for mobile on focusing on the absolute crucial things that you're writing about, then the obvious question is, okay, when I go to a tablet or when I go to a desktop screen, why am I adding extra verbiage? Why am I adding extra pictures? And the answer often is because I can, and it looks prettier. But if you focus and if you eliminate that extra verbiage, the extra pictures, what you wind up with is shorter, more focused, and more easily used, more usable documentation. And finally, mobile extends your capabilities, which is a whole other presentation in itself. But by going mobile and crossing the boundary between mobile documentation and apps, I could create documentation, say mobile documentation, with a built-in camera, with, say, that uses the phone's accelerometers to change the orientation of the material as the user moves the phone, that uses GPS and so on. And it adds tremendous capabilities to documentation. So, again, some thoughts. Again, basically, this is sort of what I just said. Is your company going mobile? Every time I do a class or a presentation, I always ask, is your company going mobile? And the answer is often, we don't know. Or, no, we don't think so. And I always suggest that you find out, because the company may well be going mobile, or at least looking at it, but they don't often think of the doc group as the people to talk to. Generally, you get the programmers involved. But there are tools that we can use, features that we can use in our tools like Flare, RoboHelp, and so on, that allow us to go mobile, to create mobile documentation. And there are new tools emerging that are the equivalent of Flare and RoboHelp, etc., for app development. And these tools are starting to cross. There's still a line between them that I can't take 500 pages of documentation and turn it into an app easily, or yet. Because, in fact, there are apps, true apps, that are purely documentation-based. The best place to see this, and I highly recommend this, and I'm not pushing anything, go to any of the app stores and look up the Bible, because there are hundreds of versions of the Bible, and when you think about it, the Bible is text with some pictures thrown in. In other words, we can create text-based mobile apps. Now, we just don't think of it yet. But if we don't think of it, we may be left behind unless we let the company know that, hey, we can play in this space. Again, focus makes us define what's really important, and capabilities. All right, new presentation types. This is going to be difficult because we are pretty much accustomed to presenting information in tables, which is great, except what happens when you have a table that's 10 columns wide and 100 lines long that you're trying to read in a mobile device, in a smartphone? You can do it, but it's not pretty. And I don't know anybody who's doing this on a production basis yet, but it may come to the point where we get rid of tables, or we rethink tables and instead look for information by doing searches. We may also have to rethink site navigation because, again, we don't have browse buttons. We don't have an index for sure. A lot of the authoring tools, Flare, RoboHelp, etc., can create mobile output with an index, but very few people do. And in fact, most people that I know aren't doing indexing. All right, writing. This stuff, you've probably heard people say this dozens of times, so I'll just skim it. Write tight. In fact, I recommend doing things that make you grind your teeth, like getting rid of adverbs, changing write tightly to write tight, which I hate. but it makes sense. Minimize the number of words. One of the simplest things I do, it's small, is I don't say this feature allows you to do something. I will just say this feature lets you. And it gets rid of a word. Use short phrases, use short words, action text only, and if the output may be rotatable, in other words, if you're producing an app, a text-based app, see what happens to your design when the user rotates the screen. All right, more image issues. Again, yeah, images can resize but may become unreadable. You can control the setting of the IMG tag at a breakpoint in order to tell your output if this output is being read on a smartphone, hide this image. But if the output is being read on a tablet or a desktop, show the image, which is fine. It's easy to do. You can just create a subclass of the IMG tag. But the problem is, what do you do if you do that, but you referred to the image in the text? You said, as shown in the image below, but now all of a sudden I'm reading your material on an iPhone and there is no image below, which means we have to think about how we write. All right, more image issues. If you use image maps, I don't know that many people who do anymore. Image maps seems to be a trend of the last decade or maybe the last century, but they are still out there. The problem is that the hotspots don't move as the image scales, so it's a little hard to see, but I've got two hotspots, obviously in the upper image, and in the lower image, the hotspot, the left-hand hotspot over Preview App has moved down below the bottom of the screen, but I don't know if you can see, there's another hotspot that's sort of spanning Preview App and Share This App. You can barely see the hotspot move, which means hotspots won't resize unless you change your images to use scalable vector graphics, SVG format, but a lot of authoring tools don't support SVG. Excuse me. So you may have to rethink your whole approach and how you use graphics if you're using image maps. All right, so again, more movie issues. Again, if you create movies and the movies scale, but you have to make sure the caption boxes, the text captions scale. If they do, you have to try this. Because if the text captions scale, the text may scale correctly but become too small to read. In which case, you have to replace the text captions with voiceover narration, which means you're now creating two versions of the same movie, text caption-based and voiceover narration-based. And then you have to control which type gets used. In other words, to physically switch movies as the screen changes. All right, the last thing I'll show you here is sort of a wording customization fix or sort of a magic trick. But if you've been writing for responsive design, you know that the wording changes on different outputs. For example, in the traditional desktop output, we would say click the button. But in mobile outputs, we would say tap the button. Problem is, that's fine if you're creating two outputs, one for desktop and one for mobile. But what happens if you're creating one output that's responsive design, and that one output is going to change from desktop to tablet to whatever. But the problem is the wording doesn't change. So a lot of people that I know, hang on a second. Excuse me, just getting over a sore throat. A lot of people I know will use some sort of in-between word. I hate to use the word weasel word, but they'll change click to select. So this way you can say select the button, and it doesn't really matter what the output is, but it doesn't quite ring true. So how do you deal with this? Well, that's one approach. But you can automate the customization between formats, which I am now pleased to say is possible. A friend of mine, a guy named Mike Hamilton from Madcap, and I came up with this approach earlier this year. and we're sort of unsufferably pleased with ourselves. But what I want to do is show you how this works, and in fact, why this trick is a good argument for knowing CSS. Because I'm going to open Flare, and I have this topic here. I'm going to preview this topic. It's going to open up in a fairly tasteless shade, background yellow shade. But you notice the sentence says you need to click the control. So let's say that this is set up, say, for a desktop screen. And then all of a sudden, through the miracle of responsive design, this thing opens up in a tablet. And you notice how the wording has just changed. And to push it a little further, let's say that it's opened up in a cell phone. And we were sort of fishing for words here. So it's saying you need to poke the control for a smartphone-sized screen, tap the control for a tablet screen, and click the control for a desktop screen. And you can control the screen size at which the wording change takes place, but this wording change takes place automatically, and it works, as I say, for Flare. Here's RoboHelp, and here I just have it say click the widgets button, and at some point it will get down to the equivalent of a tablet screen. I promise. There we go. Okay. So it just changed from click to tab. And the thing is, you can set the breakpoints, the points at which the word changes, by setting up the breakpoints from desktop to tablet to smartphone. All right, so, which, as I say, is a good reason to start learning about things like CSS. So, showing we're right at the end. So let me just come through here. This is the blatant sales pitch. And let me ask if anybody has any questions.
All right, let's see if we've got some questions. Take your time, type them in. While you're doing that, let me show you what's coming up in the dojo. It might be interesting to some of you because recent voting has been different. So type in your questions. We got our next mastermind session. It's actually not tomorrow. It's next. Oh, it is tomorrow. We're going to talk DITeval and content profiling. How does that work, and when should you use keys versus conditional text, that kind of thing. We're going to do that tomorrow. And next month, we're going to talk about Git. This is the content repository, or actually source code repository, version control system, Git. And we're going to talk about really the basics for how to use it so that you're not constantly managing to ask the software team, what was that I was supposed to do again, to check in my work. All right, where do you find out? Go to TC Dojo, and you can sign up for any session coming up. All right, we have questions.
All right.
First one, how do you put word changes in CSS yet manage translation? That was going to be my question too.
Okay, excellent question, and to tell you the truth, we haven't quite got there yet. But what I would suggest is this. Hang on a second. Well, all right. All right. I actually wasn't prepared. Yeah, I actually wasn't prepared for that question. I should have been. It's a good one. So what I'm going to do.
Show your screen again.
Okay. Yep. Okay. You should see my screen.
Yep.
What I'm going to do is this. First of all, let me just open up the. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I don't want to take the time now. Okay, let's see if I can just get this. Here we go. Here's, it's controlled through the CSS. So what happens is you're going to look here. Here's what actually controls it. This is what controls the wording. So if you want to do translation, what you'd have to do is you could go into the CSS and physically change the wording here and then further down.
Let me ask a
That would
follow-up
be,
question on this.
yeah.
When I look at websites or more static ones, not WordPress based, you'll get directories that are parallel structures for multiple languages. Would you then have a different CSS, one per language, and you'd control it that way?
Um, all right. As usual, I'm a consultant, so I'll give you two answers. It depends. Answer number one is I could have, as Liz just said, two separate CSSs and then call the one that I want for the language. The alternative is, which would be more elegant but a little bit more techy, is to have one CSS but create different media types. You might have different language media types in there. So in terms of just being ease of understanding, I think having multiple CSSs would probably be the way to go, but there are more elegant programmatic ways to do it.
Cool. All right, next question. Does all
Yes.
technical content belong on mobile devices? Oh, good question.
Does all technical content belong on mobile devices? If only we had beer and nachos. I would say, as usual, it depends. And here's why. There is obviously a core set of technical content that you need if you're telling somebody how to do their job. After that is when it depends. Because I've had clients, you've probably had clients, or worked with companies where there was the temptation to tell people everything. Because it's cool, we think it's cool, we're sure you'll think it's cool, and it's overkill. I have had a client, one in particular, an accounting software company whose documentation was 1,700 pages long, told you not only how to use the software, but it explained the underlying principles, the accounting principles behind the software. And it was great. It was essentially a two-semester accounting course with some software thrown in. And the problem is that people said, it's great, there's everything you ever wanted to know here, but with 1,700 pages, we can't find anything. And there was an uproar inside the company, and they wound up cutting it from 1,700 pages to 700 pages by trimming out all the accounting information on the grounds, the conceptual information, on the grounds that if you don't know this stuff now, you shouldn't be using our software anyway. So I would say that I would break that down to say technical, mechanical things. How do you do this? Click here, tap here, type this. Yeah, that probably should be in the help. Then there's the pure domain conceptual stuff, like what is accounts receivable? Probably no. If you don't know that, it shouldn't be there. But then there's a second class of domain information that's reference information. And to give you an illustration, in the early 2000s, I spent 4 years as STC's lead rep to the World Wide Web Consortium. I met two people from, I believe, Boeing. It was either Boeing or Lockheed, who said that they had been tasked by their CTO to move engineering workstation applications, like big Spark Station applications, down to mobile devices so that the engineers could use them on the plant floor. Obviously, the engineers didn't need to be told what a Holman transfer is or anything like that, but they might need reference information, like what is the specific gravity of zinc. So the question is, for pure concepts, I'd say no. For mechanics of how to use our software or how to use this tool, I'd say yes. And for reference information, I'd say perhaps leaning toward the yes side, if that made any sense.
Wow. All right. Well, we'll see if we get a follow-up question for that. We do have another one. We have static content in static table with multiple columns going on for dozens of pages.
Ouch.
Do you know of any strategies for repurposing this content for repurposed design, responsive design, mobile display?
Right. This is one of those rare cases where I can give you a short answer. No. I don't know of any work that's been done in that space yet. I can think of a few answers. One answer would be to simply say, look, we need this information and it has to be presented in tabular form. Therefore, as much as we hate to do this to you, you're going to have to scroll. That is one possibility. Although it may not be as bad as it sounds, if the material is going out on a tablet, that approach might be workable. If the material is going to be used on an iPhone, that's going to be really ugly. The alternative, though, is to think about what the purpose of those tables is. And in a sense, if you think about it, a table is like a frozen set of search results. So what you could do is get rid of the table and instead replace it with a database query, so that now instead of the table, if I'm the user who needs that information, maybe there's a little field, or maybe there's a drop-down. I tap that drop-down, and it says, what state are you interested in? And I say Massachusetts, and it goes off, queries the database, and brings back all the information that had been in that table. To me, that seems like the most appropriate way to do it if you think of a table as I said, a frozen set of search query results. Do I know of anybody who's done that? Nope. I can see somebody doing it, and if somebody does, I'm going to want to talk to them to find out how it worked in practice. That would be my first thought. But at the moment, no. I don't know of anybody who's approached this.
All right. She says, thanks, Neil. So that's she's at least got a place to go and get started. That's awesome.
All right.
Best we can all hope for. Best we got. When we got Neil, it's the best we got.
Aw, shucks.
All right. Well, thanks, folks. We'll hope to see you again next month. The video for this session will go up very shortly. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you all.
Always incredible to have you.
Hope this is useful, and have a good day.
Bye.